All right, let's review Identify Part 2 and the answers you should have gotten out of the lab. Starting with the Connection 5G data warehouse. We'll start with the lookup tables, as those should have been the easiest for you. Each PK here should have been labeled as a PI. So store ID, plan ID, and product ID should all be labeled with the PI. Next, let's look at the order table. For the underscore ID, remember, you wanted to have something that's unique. And if you look at this order table, it actually is a mutable event today based on the existence of what appears to be an order status and a last order status update. So we need to manufacture the underscore ID or the unique event ID. In this case, order ID concatenated with the last order status update would give you a unique event ID. The timestamp of that event then is therefore the last order status update, as that again will change every time the event updates. And the event type is the order status. Now let's look at the relationship fields of this table. Store ID and plan ID are lookup tables, and so the foreign keys here are both labeled as R's for the relationship. Now this is where the tricky part is. What is the primary identity and any other person identities of the schema? If you had gone through the Connection 5G training scenario information, you would have found that on the order table, email is always populated as a take guest orders. And once in a while, if the customer is in a logged in state, they will also capture the customer ID. So if we wanted to record orders into the real-time customer profile and never drop the record, we have to label the email as the primary identity of the order table. And therefore, customer ID could be used or labeled as an I as an alternative person identifier. Remember, the important part here is the primary identity must always exist. And so if you had chosen customer ID as your primary identity, you would never have recorded any transactions into the system where customer ID was null. We would have ignored those at processing time. Moving over, if I look at the bridge table here for order product, I would notice that the relationship is actually written on the bridge table itself for product ID. And that likely signifies, if you remember the rule number 2 for bridge tables, that the order product is likely going to move back onto the order table in a future step here. Now let's move over to the customer account table. Here, the primary identity is a customer ID because it's the only thing that looks like it's always populated and we know will likely be unique. Other identity fields that we could have used are email and mobile phone. But again, had you gone back and looked at the training scenario documentation, you would have found that the mobile phone was actually found to never be unique and oftentimes repeat on profiles. Remember, other person identity has to be unique to only one person. And in this case, email was always found unique in context of the customer ID. And so we can safely mark and label the email as another person identity. Plan ID would have a relationship at this point, as it references the plan lookup table. We'll also see on the bridge table the relationship for the product ID as customer account references all of the lines that someone owns and therefore what products are part of those lines. The last table to look at here was the billing statement table. This one's interesting. The primary key here is the underscore ID. And that's because statement IDs probably are only created once a month. The timestamp here would simply be the statement date, billing period start and end, while likely dates wouldn't be good candidates here, as statement date is when the statement's issued or when the event occurs, where the billing period is really the time in between where they are calculating the total of the bill. The event type here, you may notice, is manufactured. We didn't have a good event type that lives in the table, but we could create one. In this case, we just called it something billing statement. Again, event types are not required, but they're incredibly powerful when you get into the segmentation experience. And therefore, having something is better than having nothing to make it simpler for your marketing team to find and identify the data they want when creating their audiences. The primary identity here is the customer ID, as I am required to have one, and there's nothing else in this table that would fit. There's a relationship here back for the plan table based off of the plan ID. Next, let's look at the streaming ERD. If you look at the order payload, it's going to follow the exact same example that you saw off of the order schema. My PI will be my email, as it always exists. My I will be customer. I will have 3 relationships for product, plan, and store. My T is written off of the last order status update, and my event type is written off of order status. Moving over to the product page view payload, this is coming from Adobe Analytics. And so really the only things you have to worry about here are what are your primary identities, other person identities, and relationships, as the other things are generated by the SDK. Primary identity here is always going to be the ECID by default. And this is because in the analytics world, we always capture who this event belongs to based off of the browser, which is always cookied with a first-party cookie we call the ECID or Experience Cloud ID. Alternatively, when someone authenticates, you can label the customer ID, or an email, or a phone number as an alternative for a person identifier. But keep in mind, anytime you label other person identifiers, it must always be unique to that person and never shared amongst other people. So be very careful when you go to label other person-based identities, especially when you get into the web analytics world. Why? It's very common for people to have what's called a shared device, i.e., I browse on my phone and I hand my phone to a friend who also starts browsing on my phone using the same browser. We're both using the same ECID, but we may be logging in or logging out of our various websites off of the same device. If ECID was tracked as the primary, I and my friend may now be related to each other. Moving on, the e-commerce checkout payload should have been pretty straightforward and follow a similar pattern to the order payload. I would have had a primary identity here of email, and again, a repeat of a secondary ID or a person identity here in customer ID. My checkout date would have been my timestamp. My underscore ID here would be my purchase ID. I didn't have to manufacture it because this e-commerce checkout payload is only ever created once. Remember, IT creates this on behalf of marketing so that they can send receipt confirmations. So that purchase ID will only ever exist once within this table. And there's one relationship here back to the products as part of the initial checkout. And that's why the R shows up on the product ID.